We're continuing this month's theme of April, Foolery and Fakery, by exploring mock cables. As always, if you would like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can find direct links down in the description. So what are mock cables? Well, mock cables are stitch patterns that use increases and decreases in very specific and often very clever ways that creates an illusion of a cable. Some mock cables look exactly like regular cables, and others simply give the suggestion of a cable. Real cables and mock cables aren't directly interchangeable. That is, you can't see a sweater that has a big cable down the center and say, oh, I'm just going to pull that cable out and slap in a mock cable that has the same number of stitches. It just doesn't work that way. Mock cables have the same gauge that stockinette fabric has. So while you can't pull out a regular cable and just insert a mock cable, what you can do is take stockinette fabric that doesn't have any other stitch pattern on it and put a mock cable pattern into it without having to worry about how that's going to change the width of the fabric. The gauges are exactly the same. I'm going to start off today by demonstrating the most basic mock cable pattern there is, which is a two-stitch mock cable called a twist. Many of you are going to be familiar with this particular mock cable already, but it lays the foundation for how other mock cables are built. Most mock cables use an even number of stitches, but I'm going to show you two different three-stitch mock cables that are really interesting. Finally, I'm going to show you how you can create any width of mock cable from 4 stitches up to however many stitches your needles can hold, and using the same basic concepts for each one of them. So let's get started. So here I have 2 right twists. I have a right twist that's worked every right side row, so it creates this tight little rope. And then I have a right twist that's worked every 4th row. So you can just see how you can make them a little bit looser. A right twist is a 2-stitch cable or mock cable that leans to the right. This is a mock cable version. The sweater I'm wearing right here also has a right twist, and this right twist was worked as a real cable. So this is a 1 stitch crossing another stitch. They look nearly identical, and you can swap one out for the other in a pattern. You can't swap mid-pattern, but you can make your choice at the start of the pattern and continue with whichever one you want. So there are many, many ways of working a right twist. I did a column a few years ago that showed 5 different ways of working a right twist and 5 different ways of working a left twist that produced similar or identical results. I'm linking in the description if you're interested in that. This is the version I'm going to show you right now is probably the most common way of indicating a right twist in knitting patterns. And it is a mock cable. So the way you do it, you have these 2 stitches right here, and you begin by working a decrease. You're going to knit these 2 stitches together. You pull the loop through, but you don't let these old stitches fall off the needle yet. At this point, we have 1 new stitch on the right hand needle, and the old stitches are still on the left needle. We're going to knit into the first of those old stitches a 2nd time. Then we get the result of what looks like it's crossing. But what we've really done here is we worked a decrease and then we worked an increase after it. So I'll show you again on this second one. We're going to work a decrease. We're going to knit 2 stitches together. So we've done the decrease, and now we're going to do the increase by working into one of those stitches again, which leaves us with the 2 stitches. So that's a right twist mock cable. Here you see that I have 4 little mock cables. 2 of them have eyelets in the center, and 2 of them do not. They're solid looking. I'm going to start with this one here, and I'll show you how to work that one. I have 2 columns of 2 purl stitches between each one of these to separate them, and I start with the 2 purl stitches. Work the 2 purl stitches. Okay, so the way this cable is worked is I work 3 rows of stockinette. So if you're working flat, you would knit, you'd be purling 3 across on a wrong side row and knitting 3 across on a right side row. If you're working in the round, you would just knit those 3 stitches every time because the right side would be facing. So now it's time to work the 4th row. And this is the mock crossing row. You're going to slip the very first stitch as if to knit. So I'm entering as if to knit. That changes the stitch mount, and that's something that we want. We have 2 stitches left. I'm going to knit the first one, then I'm going to do a yarn over, that's an increase, and then I'm going to knit the second one. So now I have 4 stitches. I have the stitch that I slipped originally, and then I have the 3 stitches that I made out of the 2 that were remaining. I'm going to pass that very first stitch that I slipped, I'm going to pass it over and off the needle so that it surrounds those 3 stitches. So I started with 3, I ended up with 4 from doing an increase, and now I'm back to 3 because I've decreased a stitch out. Now I'm going to show you how to do this eyelet version. In this case, we're going to pass the 3rd stitch over the other 2 stitches. So we're going to start with a decrease. I'm going to keep my finger on these to keep them from flying off the needle. So now we've got the stitch has been passed around those 2 stitches, and now we're going to do the knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. And that's going to produce an eyelet. It's difficult to tell the difference right now when it's right under the needles, but you may be wondering, why did the second one produce an eyelet but the first one didn't? It seems like you're doing the same thing just in the opposite directions. Well, what we did in this eyelet version, remember we had worked 3 rows of stockinette. Before we worked the stitches, we passed that 1 stitch over the other 2. So we passed a stitch from the 3rd row off the needle, and it was surrounding its 2 siblings that were worked on that same row. So they were all worked on the 3rd row, and that stitch surrounded 2 stitches from the 3rd row. And then we did the increase row. We did row number 4, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1 on top of that. When we did the closed one, we slipped a stitch over to the right needle. It just was resting there. We worked row 4, the increase row of knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, and then we passed that stitch from the 3rd row was then passed around the stitches from the 4th row. So this stitch has to come up from a row below, and then it's surrounding those 3 new stitches, and it's holding them together so that you don't see the yarn over. It doesn't create that eyelet. Where with this one, we're surrounding the 2 other stitches from the same row that it was originally worked, and then the eyelet is worked above it. So in the first version, this stitch was passed over the increases created from these 2 stitches. So for the mirror, we're going to do the increases for these 2 stitches and then pass that one over. So we can do a knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, but we can't pass the stitch over these because they're on the other needle. We have to return these stitches back to the left needle. So we want to pass them back so that they maintain their stitch mounts. So we're passing as if to purl. Now we can pass that 4th stitch over the other 3. And again, I'm going to put my finger here to prevent them from sliding off the needle while I pass it over. And now it's been passed over, but now we have to return these back to the right hand needle. So we have to slip them once again as if to purl so that they maintain their stitch mounts. So we had to slip twice in order to do this. Let's do the eyelet version. Now, for the original eyelet version, we just passed the third stitch over the other two before we did the increased row. So in order to mirror that, we have to pass this first stitch over the other two before we work the increased row. That means all three have to be passed to the right hand needle first, but we have to do it in a very specific way. We have to do the first one as if to knit, to change the stitch mount, because that's the one that's going to be passed over. We want to change the stitch mount so that when it is passed over, it does not twist. Now we move these two as if to purl because we want to maintain their stitch mounts. Now we can pass this over those two. And now we can work them, but in order to work them, we have to return them to the left needle again as if to purl. Now we can do the knit, yarn over, knit, and then we're complete. Here I have 2 mock cables and 2 real cables. Each of these were knit with 6 stitches, and it takes 6 rows for each repeat to be completed. So they're all equivalent in that way. This one leans left, this one leans right, this one leans left, this one leans right. But you can see how subtle the mock cables are in comparison to the real cables. They're subtle and they're flatter, but they still give that suggestion of a cable. They also are quite a bit wider than these. Since these are the same number of stitches going across, I can measure at the widest point in the 2 cables. The 2 real cables are about 1 7/8 of an inch across, and the mock cables are about 2 3/8 inches across. So we have a 1/2 inch difference between the mock cables and the real cables. So here's how you do a 6-stitch mock cable. We're going to do a left leaning one first, and then we'll do the right leaning one. The decreases are going to lean left. The increases will lean right. You're going to start with a make one right increase. If you need help working a make one right increase, there's a link to a video down in the description. So I've done the make one, I've knit 1, 2 stitches. Now I'm going to do a left leaning decrease. So you can do a slip, slip, then knit those 2 together, an SSK, or you can do an SKP. After we've done the decrease, we will do knit 2 stitches. That's row 3 of a left leaning mock cable starts with a knit 1, and then we do the right leaning increase, make one right. We knit 1 stitch, 2 stitches, always 2 stitches between the increase and the decrease. Now we do another SSK, slip, slip, knit the 2 together. And then we're left with 1 stitch to work. Row 5 of the left leaning mock cable. This time we're going to knit 2. I'm going to start with each right side row. You are knitting an additional stitch before you do your increase. So I've knit 2, and now I'm going to do my make one right because it's a left leaning cable. And now I do my knit 2 between my increase and my decrease. And now I finished with a left leaning decrease. Slip, slip, as if to knit, then knit together. Row 1 of a right leaning mock cable starts with a knit 2. Then we do our first right leaning decrease. A right leaning decrease is a knit 2 together. Now we're going to knit 2 stitches, And we're going to end with a left leaning decrease. Make one left. Row 3 of the right leaning mock cable begins with a knit 1, and then we do the knit 2 together, the right leaning decrease. Now we're going to knit 2, always 2 stitches between the decrease and the increase. Now we do our left leaning increase. It's a right leaning cable, so it's a left leaning increase. Then we have 1 stitch left to knit. For row 5 of the right leaning mock cable, you're going to start with your decrease. Knit 2 together, right leaning decrease. Now you work the 2 stitches that you always work between the decrease and the increase. It's a right leaning cable, so we do a left leaning increase. And then we end with knit 2. And then row 6 will be like rows 2 and 4 on the wrong side, where you just purl these stitches. If you were working in the round and the right side was always facing, you would end with all knitting across. Then you just repeat this each time. Here I've got a hat in progress, so it hasn't been washed or anything. And these are 8-stitch mock cables, which I'm going to explain in a second. But what you'll see here is I didn't use make one increases. Instead, I used yarn over increases. You are free to do that. Then you don't have to worry about which way the increase leans. You just have to worry about, think about where you're placing them. When you're knitting, the yarn overs seem just enormous, but then they kind of pull in a little bit. And again, this hasn't been washed and blocked yet. It'll flatten out a little bit when it's been washed. This one is one that was worked with make one right and left increases. If I pull it wide, you can see the cable pattern really showing up. Sometimes it helps to look at a chart of a pattern so that you can really understand how it's laid out. This is an example of a chart that would be 6-stitch cables, and they would have yarn over increases. And so you can see how the decrease, this would be an SSK, it's a left leaning decrease, how they end up going toward the edge of the cable, and the increases start at the right edge, and each time they're going in one more stitch. For the right leaning cable, you have the right leaning decrease. And for any cable size, you use half of the stitches for the decreases and half for the increases. So this is 6 stitches, so you can see this is the first 3 stitches right here. And these are the last 3 stitches for a left leaning. And you can use that understanding to create a cable that's any width. You just take half of them, and you know that you're going to start the decreases at the midpoint, starting the increases on the outside part going in on either one. So this is a chart of the same cable, the 6-stitch cables, except with the make one increases. So you can see that the cable is going to the left, but the increases, these represent increases, 1 stitch going into 2 stitches, and they're leaning in the opposite direction. So you can plan your cables out that way if you want to make something larger or even smaller. Here I've got 8 stitches, and you can see these are the 4 stitches on the left for a left leaning cable. These are the 4 stitches on the right for a right leaning cable. So you can use this concept to guide you for making larger cables. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning more about mock cables. I certainly enjoyed making this video. If you have any questions about this video or any questions about knitting in general, you can ask them down in the comments, or you can join me over in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. I'd love to see you there. Please subscribe, and thanks for watching.